An AR-15 assault rifle found at a Manhattan subway station. A maintenance worker found it yesterday inside a trash can at the Cortlandt Street station. The weapon was on the platform.
So New York has spent all year trying to rid the subway of criminal activity and make it safe, but that hasn't happened. And in addition to finding weapons in trash cans, assaults and robberies down here still remain uncomfortably high, which is why ridership remains stubbornly low, with levels still lower than what they were back in 2019. And as for the riders which do use the subway, well, many of them simply aren't paying for it.
What to do about those who ride for free?
Why can't they pay?
That is money that could be used to invest in infrastructure.
MTA officials are cracking down on fare evasion on the subways and on the commuter trains. By their own estimates, the agency loses roughly $700 million to fare evasion every year.
You do worry, that somebody's going to be on the train, it's going to be violent, going to be yelling. I mean, the other day we had a guy just mopping violently.
The state comptroller's new report says the pause in congestion pricing created a $211 million gap, one that could dramatically increase in the coming years.
The system deteriorating and then service deteriorating are the two outcomes that could happen over time if they don't get that funding.
We either increase fares dramatically or we cut service. Both terrible, terrible options.
Video tonight of police arresting a man with a loaded gun on a subway staircase.
Yeah, this is scary stuff, as the man had fallen asleep with the weapon in plain view.
I feel a little scared. I'm not far from home, so I'm okay. I do fear for my safety.
So as the subway becomes more and more violent, the idea of giving it more and more money is becoming less popular. But what nobody's talking about is if our leaders push through a plan to do just that, either by decreasing service or increasing fares or both, even less people are going to pay to use the subway, and it's going to continue to get worse. Because if the subway being dangerous and crime-ridden wasn't bad enough, as it stands now, the $2.90 fare needed to enter is very expensive for the horrible, unreliable service one will surely receive down here. Trains are late around 25% of the time on average, and delays are only increasing as this place goes unmaintained and just gets rustier and rustier on a daily basis. But here's the thing, the subway system is losing money, and to fix it, our leaders are only giving us a couple of choices. Option 1 is to raise fares and cut service. Or option 2, institute the controversial congestion pricing plan, which would tax cars $15 a day just for driving, to subsidize our subway, which can't seem to run correctly, even though it gets $20 billion a year to look like this. But the real reason this whole system is failing is so simple, our tax-addicted progressive leaders can't seem to put their finger on it. The people riding it don't all pay to use it. And the losses from fare evasion add up to $700 million per year, which is only $300 million less than the $1 billion their congestion pricing scheme was supposed to provide, and is more than double the amount of their recent budget shortfall, revealing that the fix for the subway's money problems could happen tomorrow if we'd install more evasion-resistant gates and start arresting those who try to ride the trains for free. But as you're about to see, punishing criminals isn't a progressive solution to anything, especially crime. And that's why our leaders have decided to berate us into accepting highly controversial policies that are just going to make all of the problems down here worse. So I found an evasion-resistant subway entrance right here at 42nd Street at the bus terminal, but there's also another entrance here at the bus terminal that people seem to just break into all day long. No one's ever watching it, yet every couple of minutes someone's going in without paying. And as you look around, it should be pretty obvious that the city really needs the millions of dollars it loses every single year to fare evasion. And the people running the subway are right. The system's only going to get worse if they don't figure out a way to get that money. Yet none of those plans revolve around getting the money to fix the subway from the people who use the subway without paying for it.
The state comptroller's new report says the pause in congestion pricing created a $211 million gap, one that could dramatically increase in the coming years.
The system deteriorating and then service deteriorating are the two outcomes that could happen over time if they don't get that funding.
So before we get into how much money the MTA who runs the subway says they need and says they don't know how to get, you've got to understand that what we're talking about here, the real problem with the subway is that it's not a self-sustaining operation. And that's because the amount of money that the system brings in through fares is not enough to fix it and keep it operating. If this were a private business, it would have closed decades ago, but it's not, so they don't have to think like a private business. Which explains how they can lose $700 million a year across the subway, the bus, and the tolls and bridges, and still be here. But since the system operates this way, the only way to get more money is to pressure our elected officials into giving it to them, which means higher taxes, new fees, congestion pricing maybe. But the problem is that like most of the money that comes from fees and taxes, when you give it to the agency that runs this place, they're just gonna waste it. And that perfectly explains how 10 years ago, the budget to run this place was about half what it is today. Today it's $20 billion, it used to be around $13 billion. And the equipment down here is exactly the same, except for these new evasion-resistant gates, which don't work if someone wants to crawl under them. They've got these new barriers to keep you from putting your hands on it and bracing yourself as you hop over, which is a big improvement. After all, if you do want to steal from the subway, you are going to have to crawl across the ground on your hands and knees, which never gets cleaned, possibly making the ground here a little cleaner as your clothing picks up some of the dirt that was down there. But since the costs to operate the MTA that runs the subway have doubled over the last 10 years, what's to say that won't happen again over the next 10 years? And that's probably what's going to happen. There are people who say you could give the MTA endless amounts of money and they'll never get things running the way that they should. They're never going to keep their promises, and we're never going to have a modern public transit system. Yet because the subway is pivotal to life in New York, it can never close. It will always justify getting more money by the fact that it exists and that people use it to get to work. But since the money to run this place comes from all of us, it's never going to be in a situation where it's got to do things correctly or profitably. And as you're about to see, since the subway exists for the betterment of New York City, our leaders don't really have the heart to crack down on fare evasion the way that they should.
MTA Chair and CEO Janno Lieber says there could be other consequences if Albany and the city let the MTA deficit persist.
We either increase fares dramatically or we cut service. Both terrible, terrible options.
So this is how progressive policies work. Punishing criminals, that's never an option. Instead, the only people who end up getting punished are the law-abiding, but they don't call it punishment. We've just got to pay a little more so that the system can be healthier and get renovated, and so that it can better our lives and the lives of the people who use it without paying for it. And that's why city officials are so hyped up about congestion pricing. It's an unavoidable tax on cars that are stuck on the road with license plates. They're going to use that money to offset losses from buses and subways where they can't seem to enforce the fares and get people to pay. And if we don't reward their bungling of a $20 billion budget, everyone who rides the train is just going to have to pay more to do it legally. But the most insulting part of all of this is the people running the MTA keep saying they need a significant new source of revenue to offset all of their losses, which as it stands right now are about $200 million. Yet remember, they lose $700 million to people who ride for free. And it's not that our leaders don't understand that fare evasion is an existential threat to the entire stability of the system. They know this. And I would have to assume that they also are aware that every single one of the city's initiatives designed to stop fare evasion, like having the National Guard troops and the police against this barricade, it's limited. They're only here for a limited amount of time. They're gone right now, and now people can jump in and ride for free at every single gate in this station. And the real shame about all this is that if the city won't enforce its own laws, the only way to get money is going to be to punish people who obey the law. Still though, you'd also stop fare evasion pretty quickly if the people who were caught jumping ended up spending time in jail. That would end the whole thing real quick, wouldn't it? After all, fare evaders are part of a crime syndicate that costs the city $700 million a year. Is that okay? We just gonna let people be part of that group? Well, yes, the amount of fines and tickets given out for doing this are very small, and since people can do it without consequence, that group exists. It will keep happening. But the real problem the people running the subway have is that their scheme to tax cars that drive on the road, well, even though the cameras are set up to do that, that plan has been paused, which means what they're gonna have to do is get the money from the subway system itself by lowering service and jacking up fares, which probably won't encourage people to pay more to use it. And the fare evasion problem might actually get worse.
Another problem? The nation's largest public transit system is facing ridership that still isn't back to pre-pandemic levels. The MTA budget shortfall means capital improvements like extending the 2nd Avenue subway and making more stations accessible must be put on hold.
So subway ridership is only 65% of what it was back in 2019. That's 5 years ago. But our population's not 35% lower than what it was 5 years ago, which means New Yorkers are avoiding the subway like the plague. And nobody who runs the subway is curious to figure out exactly why that's happening. But I'll tell you why it is. It's dangerous down here. And people don't want to risk their life every day when they're just trying to go to work and provide for their families. That's not a good idea. And even though the subway is the cheapest way to get around, the more they raise the fares, the less true that is. And for a monthly unlimited card, $132 over 12 months, that's the cost of an e-bike. You can buy an e-bike and never have subway delays and get where you want to go, even on the weekends when they decrease the train service because they claim nobody needs to use it. Tell that to somebody who works weekends. Plus, you don't have to worry about people running around with weapons. Look at this thing that was found in the train. The fact that we're finding weapons as powerful as what our troops have in trash cans doesn't make any sense when the troops are there to stop that from happening. And with the subway being inherently unsafe and dangerous and getting worse in spite of recent security measures, how on earth can our leaders expect us to pay more for it? That's not gonna happen. They're between a rock and a hard place, and they know it. Yet for some reason, they still think these new plans are gonna work. This entrance is pretty secure. Right through that door, you've got police and you've got National Guard. And our leaders know that weapons and violence in the subway is a huge problem. But it was hoped that a controversial program, which was designed to use AI-powered weapon detectors, would be so successful that they could secure the entire system from weapons at one point. But with weapons being found in the trash cans of various subway terminals, it looks like that didn't work the way it was supposed to.
The NYPD says weapons scanners were put at 20 subway stations tested at various points. It says out of nearly 3,000 scans, there were 118 false positives, about a 4% false positive rate. It yielded no guns, but 12 knives were recovered. The Legal Aid Society.
So this state-of-the-art program with advanced AI-powered technology found 0 weapons throughout the subway system. But they're in the trash cans. They didn't look there. Jokes aside, they did find 12 knives, which could have been tools, or maybe they found a chef who had his knife set with him. That could be true, they're not telling us, but it should be pretty obvious why this test failed. First, it was only implemented at 20 stations. And just like the police and National Guard presence at this station, if someone doesn't like it, they can go around it by finding another station. With multiple entry points to the subway, you would need a lot of manpower and a lot of these machines, which cost a lot of money. The other problem is that the troops only patrol the entrances to the trains. Once you're inside the system, they're not down there keeping people safe. The other issue is that apparently these scanners hit on a whole bunch of items that weren't actually weapons. They're supposed to scan your backpack and find things inside of it that could be the barrel to something or could be a sharp object. They're not 100% accurate, and false positives are bad news because that could trigger a law enforcement response when nothing is bad, possibly putting people in danger, both officers and the general public. And because of that, activists are very happy that these subway scanners are not going to be deployed in mass. However, we do use them at other parts of New York City where there are sensitive things going on. And believe it or not, they've shown to be successful, and they may be working if they're properly used. But since we didn't properly test them, and since we aren't going to hire more police, the violence and weapons problem down in our subways probably is going to get worse before it gets better, if it gets better.
Northwell Health tells us it's rolling out Evolve technology across its hospitals, and since 2022, it has detected thousands of items that can be used as weapons, but it has not picked up an illegal firearm.
So I don't like these scanners either. I think that we should just spend the money that we could have spent on them and hire more police, but that would require funding our police, which isn't likely to happen. But even though this report makes it sound like these scanners failed, remember, the reason they fail in the subway is because people can go around them. We're finding guns on platforms and in trash cans that the machines don't pick up because nobody's gonna walk through a machine with something in their backpack that they shouldn't have if they can avoid it. Which probably also explains why at hospitals we're not finding any illegal firearms either. But the real issue here is that loading up the subway with these is just unfeasible. They require teams of officers to operate, and those officers aren't gonna be able to do anything else. They're gonna be stuck to those things, and they may be unable to respond in the event another emergency takes place because they'll be distracted. And what that likely means is that the real solution to violence and fare evasion and weapons are all one in the same. Because another test that also went down was this one right here. Look at that, the NYPD, when they step in and they start arresting fare evaders, they find all sorts of stuff, including people with outstanding warrants. Which shows that there is a real connection between people who break into the train and try to ride it for free and the committing of other crimes by those same individuals. And the reason that the police catch so many people when they go on these fare evasion operations is because they hide around the corner. They're not obvious. They've got plainclothes officers. They're a surprise that the criminals are not expecting. And the people running the subway say that their entire agency has a $200 million budget shortfall. And that amount of money is less than a third of the amount, $700 million, remember, that is lost to fare evasion. Which means they don't even have to stop 100% of the fare evasion to discover a massive new source of revenue that's out there somewhere. If only we could find it. Have we found it? Would cracking down on fare evasion solve a lot of the subway's money problems and bring it from something that is always failing towards something that is a lot closer to a profitable, self-sustaining business? Is that the whole problem with the subway? It's improperly run. Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.